Hello my dear friends, welcome back to the next episode of my Odoo custom dashboard tutorial. For those who didn't watch the first part of this tutorial, I suggest you watch that first. I will also include the GitHub repo link on the descriptions so that you can download it and follow along. During the first tutorial, we have done creating the layout, so now we just need to retrieve data from the database and replace static values. Before we start, if you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe to support my channel and that will also motivates me more to create more tutorials like this. Alright, let's get started. Going back to our project, let's start doing the KPI card components. What we have done for now is adding several props, but in order to make the user interface render, if the values and percentage has been changed, we need to use state here. Let's go back to the component and import useState from OWL. Then under setup method, let's add a new state quotations and add an object. We only need to change the value and percentage. Let's add the same values in the XML. Then in the component, let's replace the value to state.quotations.value and the percentage to state.quotations.percentage. Make sure you are in debug mode and reload the page. Okay, we have achieved the same result. But this is still static data. So let's proceed retrieving records from the database. Let's first import useService from web, core, utils, hooks, and OWL start from OWL to initialize the state before rendering the data to the DOM. Let's create a new method, getQuotations, with a syncAwait since we are going to use ORM service. Then under setup method, let's create new class field this.orm is equal to useService hook ORM so that we can easily call this service. Going back to getQuotations method, create a new constant variable data is equal to await this.orm, and since we only need an integer value, let's use searchCount ORM method. The first parameter will be the name of the model, which is sale.order. Next will be the domain as an array. We want to get only quotations, so let's add state in sent and draft. Whatever the result, let's update this the state.quotations.value is equal to data. Now we can just simply call this function under onWillStartLifecycle method. Let's go back and reload the page. Alright, the values has been changed. But to confirm it, let's go to sales module. On the filter, select quotations and deselect my quotations. Okay, we got the same quantity, which is 5 quantities. Next, let's implement the filter. So we want to automatically change the quotation value if they select any of the filters. But before that, we need to have an initial state of this select element. Let's create a new state and call it period with initial value as 90. Then under the select element, let's add tModel is equal to state.period. Using tModel, it will automatically map the value of this select box to state.period. Well, if you don't want to use this, you can manually pass the value here to state.period and as well as manually add an onChange event. But I want OWL will handle that so that I can focus on adding my own onChange event. Let's name it onChange period. Under component, let's add that method, and to check if we are getting the correct value, let's console log this state.period. Let's go back, open developer tools, and reload the page. Okay, it's working fine. We can now use this to get the data based on the selected filter. Say for example, last 90 days, we need to subtract the current date by 90 days. Luckily, we can easily achieve that using Moment.js. Odoo included this JS library out of the box. To see some of the functionalities, let's open the website. As you can see, these are the most frequently used methods like formats, start of, end of, and others. What we need right now is the subtract and format method. Let's copy this code and console log it. But let's replace this to this.state.period. Let's go back to Odoo and reload the page. Click any periods. And yes, the days are subtracting to the current date. Next, we need to use the correct format since the calendar will return different formats. Like for example, less than 7 days. So we need to use format method and pass the letters that corresponds to your Odoo default format. From my end, it's month, day, year. I can then simply pass big letter L since this matches the format. Going back to the component, let's replace calendar to format and add capital L. In case this doesn't match, you can manually pass the format. Let's duplicate this and instead of L, let's add dd/mm/4y. Let's go back and reload the page. Select any filter. And yes, both of the formats are working fine. So it's up to you on what method you want to use. Let's now store it to a new state, date, since we are going to use it several times. We can then use this state under getQuotations method by adding a new domain, date order is greater than this state.date. Then go back on onChangePeriod method and call await this.getQuotations. Let's go back and reload the page. Select 30 days. Okay, select 90 days. Alright, the value is changing based on the filter. You probably noticed that the initial value is 0, even if the default filter is less than 90 days, right? It's because this.state.date is only updating when we change the filter. To solve this issue, let's create a new method, getDates, which will just update the date's state. We can now call this under onWillStart and onChangePeriod method. Let's go back and reload the page. Now the value is showing, and also when changing the filter. There's still one issue here. If we didn't select any period, it should show all the records. But what's happening now is that it's reducing 0 days, so the domain will become date order is greater than today. Let's go back to getQuotations method and create a new variable domain, which by default will have domain state in sent or draft. And only if this.state period is greater than 0, add a new domain, date order is greater than this.state.date. Now let's pass this variable as the domain. Go back, reload, and try. Choose select period, and now it's showing all quotations. And we can confirm that if one of these quotations, edit and make the year to 2022. Let's reload. And now it's 4 quotations. Then choose select period. Alright, it's working fine. Next, we need to calculate the difference between current period and last period. In order to achieve that, we need to know the start date and end date of last period, and we can easily get that by just multiplying this.state.period by 2. And that will be the previous date. If this is previous date, then let's rename this to current date and update the date in getQuotations method. We then simply duplicate this code and rename this to prevDomain and prevData. Then in domain, date order should be greater than previous date, and add another domain, date order is lesser than or equal to the current date. Then to calculate the difference, let's add a new variable percentage is equal to data minus prevData divided by prevData times 100 to get the percentage value. Then instead of value, replace this to percentage and add the value of the percentage here. To check if the percentage is correct, let's console log the current and previous date. Let's go back and reload the page. Okay, right now it's infinite since there's no data on last period. Then based on the console log, we need to add quotations between these dates. Let's try to add half of the quantity of the current date. Let's go back and reload. And yes, we have increased by 100%. If we add the same quantity by duplicating it twice, let's go back and reload. Now we don't have any difference. If you add two more quantities, let's go back and reload. Now the percentage decreased by 33%. But we need to add only two decimal places. So we need to call toFix method and pass 2. Go back and check. Alright, it's rounding up to 2 decimal places. Then for the orders, we can just copy the same method and rename it to get orders. But instead of state in send or draft, let's make it sale or done. In order to not define another state in setup method, we can actually create it immediately here, provided that the value will be stored as an object. Let's comment this code and below, add this that state that orders is equal to an object and add the value and percentage. Under onWillStart method, let's call getOrders as well as under onChangePeriod method. Then in the component, let's replace this static value to state that orders that value and the percentage to state that orders that percentage. Go back and reload the page. Alright, we still achieve the same result. Next, let's do the revenue. Let's create a new variable current revenue is equal to await this.orm.readGroup method. Since we need to calculate amounts here, we can't use search count, but instead, we need to use readGroup ORM method and pass sale.order model. The domain will be the current domain. Next will be the field we want to retrieve, which is the amount total. And we have the option on what aggregation we want here, wherein in our case, it will be sum. Next will be the name of the field to group by, but let's leave it empty since we want only a single data and by default, numbers will be automatically aggregated. Let's try to console log the result. Go back and reload the page. Alright, we don't have any issue and we got one result, which is what we want. In that case, we can easily duplicate this code, rename it to prev revenue, and change the domain to prev domain. For a percentage, let's copy the same code and replace data to current revenue and access the first key and then the field name amount total. Let's do the same with the prev revenue. Now let's add a new key revenue with the value of current revenue amount total. And for revenue percentage, copy the same code and replace it to revenue percentage. Let's go to the component and update the value to state that orders that revenue and percentage to state that orders that revenue percentage. Go back and reload the page. Alright, we are getting the values as well as if we change the filter. Before we do the average order, Let's fix first the amount format. Since I am using larger font, I want it to be divisible by 1000 and add k at the end. To do that, let's divide it by 1000 and wrap it by parentheses and add to fix method by 2 decimal points. Then in order to add letter k at the end, let's use template literals by using backtick and wrap this by curly brackets and add k at the end. Now for the currency, I will just make it as static by adding $sign at the beginning, but I will give you an idea on how to do it. If we check the list of fields of sale order model, there's two fields, currency ID and currency rate. So in case there are two or more currencies, you need to use the currency rate to convert it to the company currency. And to get the default company currency, you can use the company service by calling this.env.services.company. I guess I will leave that to you guys. Let's now go back and reload the page. And there you go. Let's change the filter. And it is working as well. Now for the average, maybe you know it already. By just changing sum to average, and that's it. So let's copy the same code, but instead of revenue, let's rename it to average. The same with the state, duplicate, change it to average. And lastly, let's update the template, change the value to state.orders.average and percentage to state.orders.average percentage. Let's go back and reload the page. Okay, change the filter. It's working as well. To verify if we have the same result to Odoo default, let's go back to 90 days. Check Odoo default dashboard. Yes, it's the same, except for the quotation, since my base here is on the order date. I think they use create date here. Let's change the filter to 30 days. Go back to our dashboard and select 30 days. And yes, it's the same, only that our amounts has been rounded. Lastly, for this episode, let's add action service to each KPI with different views, context, and pass the domain based on the filter. Let's start on the quotations. Let's create a new method, view quotations. But before we can create a new action, under setup method, let's define this.actionService is equal to useService action. Going back to view quotations method, let's use this.actionService.doAction method. We have several options here. The easiest one is by just passing the action XML ID. Let's go to quotations and edit actions, copy the external ID, and pass it as a parameter. Before we can try this, we need to add an onClick event to this KPI card. Since this is a component, we need to pass our method to the KPI card subcomponent. To achieve that, we define a new props onClick. You can name whatever you want, but we need to use bind method and pass view quotations method we created. Now under KPI card component, let's define an onClick event, which will be an arrow function so that it will not get executed immediately, and call props.onClick. Let's also add class cursor pointer, go back and reload the page, click quotations, and yes, we got directed to the quotations list. However, maybe you don't want this since you also get the default filter. Although we can add additional context here like we do in XML template, search default, and the name of the filter. Let's open search view. Okay, let's add draft. Go back and reload. Click quotations, and yes, the quotations got added on the filter. But if we try to remove the default filter, which is my quotations. Go back and reload and try, it will not work. The solution for this is to create a new window action in XML so that you can decide whatever context and domain you want to add, and then pass that newly created action in our method. But again, there will be an issue if we want our domain to be dynamic. Let's say for our project, the domain will be based on a filter. The next solution is to pass an object to this method, which is similar object when you call an action in Python code. We define the type, which is ir.actions.act window, the name to quotations, rest model as sale.order. For the domain, we can simply copy the domain under getQuotations method and use it as a domain value. It's the same name, so no need to pass the value. Then the views, we need list and form view. Let's go back and reload. Click quotations. Yes, it's working fine, but you probably noticed that the list view is different from the default quotations view. That's because in sale order, we have more than one list view. Let's see the list view in this quotation and also to sale order. Notice that they have different external ID. Now under the action service, notice that we didn't specify the list view by adding false. And in that case, whichever has lower sequence, it will be the one to be displayed. In sale order, it's 2 and in quotations, it's 16. Now to get the ID of this list view, open the model data and the ID will be the record ID field. Let's try to add this ID and replace false in list view. Go back and reload. Click quotations. And yes, we got the correct view. But this is not ideal to just add static ID, right? So why don't we use search in the database by the name and get the record ID? Let's define a new variable list view. We need ORM service, so let's add async and await this.orm.searchRead since we need to get specific field. Add ir.model.data as the model. Domain will be name is equal to the external ID and we want to retrieve record ID. Then instead of this number, let's check first if there's a record using length property. If true, then add the rest ID. Otherwise, false. Let's go back and reload. Click quotations, and there you go. We achieved the same result. Now for sale orders, we can just copy this code and name it view orders. But let's remove async await here since by default, the tree view will be the sale order. But we need to change the state to sale and done. Remove not necessary code. And for this, I want to add a context group by date order. Go to our template and copy this prop and rename it to view orders. Go back and reload. Click orders. Alright, the group by context has been applied. Let's do the same to revenue and average order. Copy this code. Rename it to view revenues, but this time, let's add pivot view. Update the template. Copy the same code to both KPI and add view revenues method. Go back and reload. Click average order. Okay, go back, select 30 days. Click revenue, and yes, we got the same value. Alright, now we have completed these 4 KPIs. On the next video, we are going to add values to each graphs. Right now, there are 2 issues here. The first one is the filter, wherein it always resets to its initial state whenever we go to a different screen and go back. Right now, it's 30 days, but after clicking one of these KPIs and go back, the filter will reset. You can solve this by creating a new service or use the cookie service. I have a separate tutorial to that. You may try it to solve this issue. The next one is when you add graph view in our actions. Some of the functionalities will not work, like the colors. It's because by default, Odoo already has chart.js file which has been loaded when the default graph view has been mounted. Now we have two chart.js files, and of course, it will have confusion which one to use. Let's see on the next tutorial how we can solve that. For now, let's end this tutorial, and please subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. Hit like and share this video. Thank you and God bless.